Welcome to Breaking Sales, a podcast dedicated to helping you have tough, meaningful, and rewarding conversations with your prospects and clients. In meaningful, what we mean is these are the conversations you truly feel like you are the prospect or client's conversational peer. There's no anxiousness or uncertainty holding you back. You feel a sense of calm and confidence in asking the tough questions. Not thrown off by the bad news, and you expect the prospect to think about and invest into the conversation as much as you do. On Breaking Sales, we use the filter of psychology and innate human behavior to deconstruct the many misleading sales approaches that actually work against your efforts to build trust and close the business. Let's get started. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you might be. It's hard to believe that we've been podcasting here, Breaking Sales, since April of 2020. It's crazy. As you know, we've been very consistent with our topics over the past few years regarding mindset, preparation, decision psychology, resilience, and many other themes related to having powerful and meaningful conversations. Looking back, I never originally had a goal of hitting 200 episodes. It's always been about trying to provide content that supports our community's journey, the journey of reaching new levels of performance in sales. Now, for our 200th episode, I'm sitting down with someone who has spent decades operating at the highest level of competition and coaching others to rise to the moment when it mattered most. He's walked the walk with 3 college national championships to his name, an 85% win rate, and a 7-0 record against Michigan. Urban Meyer is one of the most successful coaches in college football history. He spent his career developing players who could execute under pressure when the stakes were real and the margin of error was razor thin. Today, Coach Meyer and I are talking about what that level of performance actually takes. And a lot of it comes down to what you put into it before that moment actually arrives. One of my favorite parts of interviewing Coach was listening to some of the great advice he's received throughout his career. Some will surprise you. Whether you lead a team, you want to get better at sales, or want to have a greater impact on those around you, I think my conversation with Coach will give you a lot to think about. Let's get started. The first topic I'd love to get into, and it's great having you on the show, is just the importance of preparation. And I'll kind of explain it a little bit from a business and a sales standpoint. A lot of times I think people wing it in sales and they wing it in preparation. And they show up and they think their natural personalities or their natural gifts are going to get them through the conversation or get them through the situation. And so what we do is we teach a lot about the importance of preparation mentally and all of that so that you're ready for whatever the conversation's going to throw at you. My gut is you never let a team of yours, and there's never been a team where you guys would wing it. So I'd love to hear how much detail you guys would get into regarding preparation.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. I know we are a product of those who mentor us, including our parents and then in our professional careers who we look up to, who we work for and with. And I'm almost humbled and embarrassed to share, I coached with and for some of the greatest that have ever done it. I had an upbringing where there is no such thing as lack of preparation. I mean, that was I came from a very academic family. My father's chemical engineer. My 2 sisters were really brilliant gals that one became associate provost at University of Cincinnati. And I was in a household where preparation and in academics and also athletics, that was just part of waking up in the morning. And then it carried on with Woody Hayes. And I grew up in the Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechler era. They were both friends. And then Earl Bruce was my mentor. He was the coach that followed followed Woody Hayes at Ohio State, and then I worked for guys like Sonny Lubick and Lou Holtz. And so I'm fortunate, in the coaching profession, like any profession, you run into, you hire people or you run into other people that just didn't have the same luxury I had as mentors like I had. And they did wing it. And that was like a foreign language to me. I didn't, it was almost, when I look at what a college coach does as far as preparation, every movement on a field is choreographed. There's nothing left to chance. And that's one of the reasons that, at age 55, I said I was done, because it was just it was the hours spent that you try to choreograph and cover every movement, every situation, which obviously is impossible to do, but you try. That's your job as a coach, is to get that player. So when they're in a situation, it's not the first time they've experienced that. And it would break my heart when that player was put in a situation that we didn't cover. And so the word wing it was never part of our vocabulary, or not word term. That just wasn't. And the other thing that I think, Dan, is interesting is that if you ever said it's the player's fault, you're probably fired. That was never, that was beaten into my skull back in 1986 for Earl Bruce, that if you ever said, well, I told the player to do that, or it's his fault, you probably got one warning, and then you had to move on. Because every action or reaction is taught or allowed. That's the way I was taught to look at it. When you're coaching these young people, that's your job as the coach, is to use the term you just used, prepare them.
Yeah, I read, I had a neighbor of mine who played in the NFL for about 10, 12 years. And he told me a story once that something like you would prepare 44, 45 hours a week just to have the chance to play 6 or 6.5 minutes on Saturday or Sunday.
And that's something.
Is that kind of how it goes?
That's per week, and then throw in the off season, throw in the spring practices, throw in the training camp, and I think it's much more than that. I've heard, I've heard that, the term 10,000 comes up in our world. So when you ask a quarterback to throw this certain pass throughout his time, 10,000 is probably extreme, but is it really? I mean, when you go back in his entire, livelihood, when you throw that field curl route, he's thrown that thing thousands of times before he's asked to do that. At least the well-coached ones are, and I would always say, I would say this, for example, when I hear someone say he's a natural, I would always disagree. We're all natural, and, God's gifted us with, skill sets, but to say Tom Brady was a natural quarterback, that's unfair to Tom Brady. Tom Brady worked awful hard to become a natural. Other guys didn't work hard as him. I hate to say it, that's the simple way of looking at it.
One of my questions was going to be around that, Coach, where you've probably had players who were unbelievably gifted. Like even at the level that you've coached, these players were just another level of giftedness. But maybe they didn't have discipline. And how would you guys handle that? Where, innately, these players' athletic ability is way up here, but the discipline, they struggled with it.
Yeah, the greatest form that I used of motivating that type of player, because that player is more common than the other player. To get a player with elite, I used to grade everybody 1 through 5, and 5 was elite, 3 was average, and 1 was poor. To get a 5 player as far as discipline, commitment, work ethic is very rare. To get the 3 is very commonplace, but that's why they call you coach. When I had Tim Tebow, I used to joke around and say Donald Duck could coach Tim Tebow. We're not I don't pay you to coach Tim Tebow. That's one of those rare dudes that, I mean, he's there early, leave late, and, you're not motivating Tim. Now you're developing him, but you're not motivating him. But you're there to coach that average guy, the guy that the 80% of our world is made up of average people. And what separates the average from elite is simply the mentorship, the coaching, the direction, and every play. And this is, Lou Holtz used to say this all the time. I'd call him and ask him a question, and his response was every time, what kind of team do you have? If it was a team question, or if it was a question about an individual, he'd have to ask what kind of, what are we dealing with here? Because there's no cookie cutter. That's the beautiful thing about the way God created all of us, is that everybody's different. And you as a coach, a teacher, a leader, a parent, that's your job, is to reach that person. And the great coaches I've been around, that's one of probably their greatest skill set, is to reach that person. I've been around other coaches that aren't really good. They're very knowledgeable, but they have the hardest time reaching people because, every player to them is the same. And that can't be further from the truth.
Yeah. When you think about the prep, right, you have the film study, right? You have the walkthroughs. Is the ideology there to help put them in those stress positions and situations repetitively, so when they do happen on the field, it's, I don't want to say second nature, but they're able to perform because there's more of a level of familiarity and calmness? Is that what it is?
Yeah, this is really interesting. And Tim Kite, we wrote the book together, Above the Line, and he's unfortunately passed away. He became my mentor at Ohio State, and he's a leadership consultant and arguably one of the smartest guys I've ever been around. But he was a big believer, everything is systematized. For example, I want to run a play. You don't just put in a play. It's a system of, and teams do just run plays and it looks awful. But when you put in a play and it's part of a system, that's when you see, the players kind of understand the system. The play is part of a system. It's not just a play. There's elements off, whether it's a pass and you have a run off of it. So it's a system. It's the same thing with teaching. When you install something, or if you're asking a player to do something, and I was crazy about this because I believe in this, that there's a very set way of going about it, and that I learned it that way. And like I said, unfortunately, a lot of young coaches didn't learn it, but it was my job to teach them. So when you put in a play, the first thing you do is called installation, and it's in a meeting room. It's on the board. It's on the videotape. It's retention, and then it's something called direct teaching. That the player's got to be able to teach it back to you, and then now we're moving. Now we're moving along. Okay, then you go out to the field, and you have something called walkthrough. Now you're teaching the body how to move, the brain and the body how to do this thing before you're asking them to do a full speed. And then you do something called individual, which you're on the practice field and you're going, and they're physically teaching this player how to do it. Then you go to group work, which now if I'm a running back and it's a run play, I'm working with a quarterback now. And then you go with the offensive line, and then, and only then, do you ask that player to now do it in a live situation. And I wish I had a nickel for every time I watched, whether they were young coaches or, quite honestly, coaches that aren't very good, just throw it out there. And they're the same ones that say, well, that player, I told him that, the player's not very good, or, and I'd lose my mind. Because again, I worked for Lou Holtz, Woody Hayes, and Earl Bruce. I didn't work for Woody Hayes, but he was, around when I was a young coach. And I learned from that generation. That generation, you would never say, that player is not good enough, or I told him to do that. I said that earlier. They would always go back and say, well, let's review how you taught it. And it's a very systematized way of teaching. I'm glad you asked that question. That not many people ask that. It's a system. When when you're talking about sales or business, just throw someone out there without teaching that person, that's lazy. To me, you as a leader that's an indictment on you as a leader.
What I really thought fascinating about what you shared, Coach, is just the process, but you started the process with you teach the player, but then you have the player teach what they just learned. Then they start going through the walk through an individual component and then even a group component of it. Then you decide if you're going to throw the play in there or not, right?
That's right.
And I think too many times in business and in sales, there's not enough of that mentoring, coaching, or teaching so that the individual has the ability to handle the pressure.
Here, hey, Dan, let's go. I want to add this. This is really cool stuff. And this is just something I've come up with over my almost 40 years in it. So a situation that every leader is going to deal with, it's guaranteed it's going to happen, is when you have someone on your team or in your unit or a part of your company, and that person is not performing well. That's a guarantee. That will happen. Matter of fact, it usually happens multiple times a day if you have a big enough team. And your job of the leader is to come up with a strategy to fix that situation. And there's only two strategies. One is called elimination. You fire him or her. I'm not a big fan of that, but I've only done it once in 20 years. When I tell people that, and they're like, "Really?" I say, "Yeah, I grew up in an era where you don't just fire people, you find out why." And so, again, the strategies are, number one, fire and elimination. Number two is development. Now, development takes a lot more time, a lot more effort, but you're also, when you fire people, you're creating an environment of fear, whether you know it or not. Everyone knows you fired that person, so now you get a little bit of a cover your ass mentality. You get a environment of fear. I was in an environment only one time in my career, and I hated it. I worked in a situation where the coach fired people all the time. And I drive to work and I hated it because I didn't know, am I going to lose my job? I mean, and then you start covering your ass. That was not the environments of the Lou Holtzes, of the Earl Bruces, the Woody Hayes, Bo Schembechlers, not myself. So I'm interested in your thoughts on it, but I'm pretty firm in my belief in this. If that person is not performing, it's one of three reasons. Number one, that person has lack of trust in you, his direct report, or those around them. So number one, there's a trust issue. We're all humans. If you're in a situation or you're with people you don't trust, you don't perform. Number two, which is something you mentioned a minute ago, which has kind of led me on this discussion, is the person's skill set is not developed or utilized. And that goes back to the book Good to Great a little bit, where, you got to get people in the right seats on that bus. You got to make sure. I've spoken hundreds of times to businesses, and we've had this discussion. And you put a guy that's great with sales, and you put him in some job where it's numbers, where it's not and you wonder why the guy's not performing well. You're not utilizing that person's skill set, or you're not developed it. And then finally, and it's never been more important than 2026, is that person's in conflict. Something's going on. He's going through a divorce. He or she has an illness, or their parents or their children, God forbid, have an illness. They have an addiction. I've had to really put some coaches into some kind of help, whether it be alcohol or something else. To me, it's worth that time, effort, and even resources to help that person. First of all, the empathy that we all supposed to have, that's number one. But then also I've experienced it. Can you imagine what that person, his or her loyalty to you is like if you help them through a situation? Now you move mountains. Now you win national championships. Now you have superhuman effort because you've created that environment. I feel very strong about that.
And the amount of time that you spent with your coaches and your players, I get it. But how many hours a week would all of you invest together?
Yeah, we would spend more time with each other than our families.
Yeah.
I have multiple. And I have 3 children at home, and I'm spending, during the season, 10 times more time with you than with them. So I expect a lot out of you, and you should expect a lot out of me. We're in this thing for 8 hours a day, and I go home tonight, and especially my children are young, I wouldn't see them for a couple of weeks because I would leave before they got up, and I'd get home after they're in bed. And that broke your heart as a parent, but it's also your job is to win games, and we're the ones that selected this profession.
Yeah. How's feedback? Taking a little tangent here, right? I mean, what was your philosophy and approach on feedback, whether to a coach or to a player?
That's a great question. I think everything's earned. I'm going to answer the way Lou Holtz would answer the question, and that is, who's providing the feedback? If the person has earned that right to give feedback, I absolutely took that into consideration. If it's a person that has not earned the feedback, then you're wasting my time. I don't really care what you think. That's not important to me because, before we move forward, you've got to earn that right. And I think people make a grave mistake sometimes grave mistake, by listening too much to people that have not earned the right to speak. And I've been also heard, because like I said, I've been on corporate boards and sat in HR meetings, and I would sit or I'd listen, and then I'd ask questions, and I was like, well, everybody deserves that respect, and everybody. I'm like, whoa, what are you talking about? No, that's not true. Everybody's different. The person that has done everything right, that is a team first, excuse my language, card carrying badass that has done everything you want. When Tim Tebow, and I use him, or Joey Bosa, or I could go on, and JT Barrett, when they have an opinion, you're darn right I'm listening. I'm not going to give names, but if someone else walked in that has trouble going to class, has trouble behaving the right way, has trouble going to sleep at night, not putting stuff in their body, and they give opinion, no, there's no opinion. Your opinion doesn't count. And that might be, some people say, man, that's tough. That's not tough. That's the way it is.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that, the whole earned component of it.
Everything's there. I mean, I want to, there's a lot of parts of society right now that are failing miserably. You pick up the newspaper. I mean, I guess there's no newspapers, but you read the news and you listen, and you're like going, and you wonder why that, whether it be company, city, area, is failing miserably, is because you've taken out, I think, what America was built on, and that's meritocracy. There's no gifts. There's zero gifts. I mean, no, there is. It's called charity, and it's called a gift. On Christmas, you give a gift. Charity's great, but that's exactly what it is. But meritocracy is the foundation of successful organizations.
I've found in sales and in leadership, those who have that same philosophy that there's no gifts, no one owes you anything, they always by far tend to be the best performers, because they go about their business and they know nobody owes them anything. You got to go earn it.
Let's hold that for a minute, where then it's also your responsibility to reward those people. Because there's again, that's the way the meritocracy works, and that's the way capitalism works. That's the way, again, I'm very obviously opinionated. That's the way great football teams work. That's the way great organizations work. You better reward the alphas, because that's who's moving the needle. And you better not, or motivate those that are not the alphas to become alphas.
And hopefully the process, right, that you have set in place helps some of those people who may be a 3 and not yet a 5, but the process that you have helps the 3 become a 4, or maybe the 4 become a 5.
That's it. That's it. That was our coaching seminar every year before the season started, what you just said. That's it. Our job is we don't have 1s and 2s at places like Ohio State and Florida. You just don't. You don't get there. So our job is to take 80% of the organization, which is 3s, and move them to 4s. And if you can somehow move some more to be 5s, that's when you get big rings on your fingers, big bonuses, and play for these really cool big trophies.
Your record against Michigan is legendary, 7-0. Would you prep for that game different? Was there additional prep or uniqueness in your prep?
That was every day. That was 365. That was to the point, people laugh, and I kind of laugh now because I'm out of it and no desire to get back in. But it's also unhealthy, to be completely consumed by an opponent, which I was. There was never a day that I didn't think about beating that team. There was never a day that I didn't somehow prepare, whether it be study who they're recruiting, physically studying their film. We'd be in spring, and I had one coach that was assigned to, I want to know who they're recruiting, who they hired, what plays they're running, and and there was never more than a week would go by in Ohio State that we didn't have, because, when I got hired back in the day, most of your players are from the Midwest or from Ohio. As the evolution, Ohio just, with the population shift, I was getting players from Georgia, Texas, St. Louis, everywhere. So it was my job to indoctrinate them to that rivalry. And how do you do that? You educate them. And so there was something always going on in that facility about how to beat that team.
Yeah. I mean, and the intensity of the rivalry too. But I'd always heard that it was a 365-day a year intensity. If you're enjoying this episode, you might also enjoy episode 184, The Cost of Poor Preparation. Thanks for listening, and let's get back into it with Coach. I want to talk a little bit about resilience, right? Because I'm gonna use an example. So I think it was 2024. Ryan Day coaching, and they lost to Michigan, Ohio State, 13-10, upset. But then him, his staff, and his team come back and they win the national championship. And the word I have to ask about is the resilience in as a group, or that team had to have been incredible.
And the leadership and the maturity, because that was a very veteran team. That was, I don't know the great details, but of course I'm close with Ryan and the Buckeyes still. What went on in those locker room meetings and the team meetings, and because I was there that day we lost to the Wolverines, and it was awful. It was like the world ended for a moment. Like, how did that happen? It was not only they lost to a bad team, and you had the Jack Sawyer and some other really mature players that, I call them grown-ass men. Those weren't little boys. Those weren't the 17-year-old. These guys were veteran, grown men that took it on their shoulders. Because if they didn't have that, there's no chance they would have been rallied back from that dark day. So it was a case study in leadership, a case study in maturity, and what you just said, how to respond from adversity.
I mean, the pressure that, at least from the outside looking in, that Coach Day was under had to have been enormous.
Oh, I've been there.
His ability to block. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, I said I was there. Lucky we weren't there. We're losing to those guys. But I'm from the great state of Ohio. And it was intense.
So when you think about resilience, kind of a deeper question here, do you think it's something, as you've witnessed great players and great coaches around you, that people are born with? Can it be learned? Can it be developed? How did you guys in your organizations as a coach try to tap into that resilience or develop it?
Well, I'll answer the question the same that Lou Holtz always did. Depends on your team. Depends on the player. Do I believe that there are people that, again, I do believe God blesses people with certain other skill set, but I also believe, kids learn that throughout how they're raised. If you're a silver spoon kid that you've never had to fight for something, they don't really understand resilience. If you're a kid that's comes from a tough family and maybe unfortunate background where you're in a fight to just eat every day, resilience is part of their lifestyle. So it depends on that. So I ran our program a lot like Navy SEAL and Army Ranger and Special Ops. I've studied them my entire career. My father's an Army Armored Division, just the greatest example of resilience is in toughness and teamwork and dedication. I go on and on and on, is the men and women who serve our country. You know, they're the most selfish human beings on the planet to do what they do for us. And what do they get in return? There's no other profession. There's no other people like that. So I utilize that all the time as an example. So I would train our team a lot like that. Our off seasons were awful. We're hard. We're miserable. They were put in some really tough situations because we taught them how to respond, but I also want to see how they respond. I don't want to have to find out how this player is going to respond in the third quarter against Michigan State in East Lansing. You know, it's too late. I already better know how that person is going to respond. And if they can't know how to respond, we better teach them. And if they still can't, they're not going to play. Because the chance you're going to face adversity in those games is, again, the correlation between will you be dealt with it and how you respond is a perfect one. It's going to happen. And those that respond the right way are the ones that usually win that game.
I like what you shared there, because it makes me kind of connect back to your prep process too, when you talked about teaching, having the player teach it, and then doing a walkthrough, and then an individual component and a group component. In essence, you're building some resilience there. You're putting them in a stress position,
sure, before
you put them out in the game, right?
Yeah, Woody Hayes and them, it's called direct teaching. And for the body, mind to grow, it's got to be experience discomfort. If you want to get stronger, you got to tear your muscles. I know that sounds hard, but if you want to get stronger in the bench press, how do you do that? If you want to go run a 4-minute mile, or you want to, anything athletic to be great at is painful. Why? It's discomfort. Same thing when you challenge your mind and I remember the hardest classes I ever took in college when I get my master's degree. I was like, wow, this is awful. But what's happening during that period of discomfort is called growth. And same thing sitting in a learning environment. I've been in those. I walked in and people asked me to evaluate their program, and I walk in and it's awful. It's comfortable. And I would tell the coach, I said, this is the softest shit I've ever, this is soft. Nothing's growing here. I know everybody's all friends and we're going to have a group hug here in a minute, but that's not going to help you beat your rival. Your job as a teacher, and I think it's also your job as a parent, is to put your kids or your children or your team in very uncomfortable situations. Because my father used to say that, what's that do? That builds scars. You scar up, for the resilience that's about to take place. If you're not scarred up and you get hit with some very difficult stuff, it'll break you.
I 100% agree with that regarding you need to be scarred up. I like the term. I've never heard it that way. But growing up, you have to learn to dig yourself out of holes. You can't have people come in and save you all the time.
That's correct.
Yeah. So from a resilience standpoint, when the team was down after a big loss, what was your approach? How would you approach the team? How would you approach the coaches?
Yeah, I wasn't great at that. I've had some strengths in my life, and then I've had some weaknesses. And another reason why I just didn't survive, some of these guys coached till they're 70 years old. I knew when I hit 55, I was done, because a loss took my soul away, especially a loss where I knew that we shouldn't have lost. And I wasn't good at blaming others. If you look at my career, I never, people lose games and they fire their coaches, and I never did that. I just would always take it on myself, the burden of, it was my fault. It was not uncommon for me, if we lost a game, I just went to sleep. I'd go in the office and I just replay this over and over again. And why didn't I force this coach to work on this situation? Why didn't I cover this situation? How did this happen? And, resiliency to bounce back from a loss was something I really struggled with. Fortunately, we didn't lose a lot or lose 2 in a row very often, but it was I admired people, and I tried to study them that were resilient in that way. And that was not a strength of mine.
Well, you only had, I think, 32 of them. So I don't think it happened often.
But I forget most of the wins, but I remember every damn loss. I can tell you that.
I was going to ask you, Coach. I mean, if you kind of reflect on your tendencies, and I've reflected on mine. Do you love to win more, or do you hate to lose more?
Yeah, that changed as I've shared this the other day with people, is that when you're, and Lou Holtz used to say it, climbing the mountain is about passion. It's about energy. It's about love. It's about the fight. And then once you reach the top, it's about maintenance, and maintenance is nothing but exhaustion. I loved to build early in my career when I was at Bowling Green in Utah and even Florida. I mean, that was the fight, man. I loved every minute of it. My first couple of years at Ohio State, we took over a program that lost 7 games. I mean, Ohio State never lose 7 games. And it was, man, we're going to redo everything and get it going. And then once you're there, you're like, okay, oh shit, we're going to lose everything. It's so early in my career was the love of winning. Later in my career is fear of losing.
And if you don't mind me asking, what do you think drove that shift maybe?
Fear of losing is just I coached every day with fear, and that's unhealthy. And when I was at Utah, we were picked to finish last in the conference. I didn't care. It was, let's go, man, let's go. Then you're picked to, number 1 in the country almost every year, and you just go in a game like, what if I screw this up? What about this? What about this? You're half empty guy. And that happens a lot. Obviously I still am very close with several coaches out there, and that's not uncommon.
Like you said, the Lou Holtz component, where climbing the mountain is different than maintaining where you are on top of the mountain. Is that?
Yeah. That's it.
Is that experience?
That's that experience. And obviously he's a man of wisdom. I was with him near the end of his career on his last year at Notre Dame. And he said that to me one time. He said, in his last game against USC, I remember we're walking to practice, and he said, I hate this. And I looked at him like, what are you talking about? You're the head coach of Notre Dame. We're getting ready to play USC. And he's like, just the fear of losing, and it's not healthy. And it's for people that say that doesn't exist, you've never been there.
Kind of brings up one of the other topics just wanted to talk a little bit about with you, because I know it's so important in business and so important for culture and so important in sales, is accountability. How did you handle accountability as the head coach with your culture, your organization, players, coaches, all of that?
That's a great question. Again, I'm going to answer again like Lou Holtz. Depends on what kind of team you have and the maturity. You mentioned that Ohio State team a couple years ago, and when they lost that terrible game, and then you have these grown men that, figured it out. If you got a bunch of young boys, then you have to figure it out. There's nothing more valuable than a veteran player in a room, a grown-ass man in a room. That for a coach is the facilitator, is the teacher, is the educator. The player is the doer. And I think sometimes, and I know I failed at times when, my value certainly is nowhere near the doer. And so when you have a doer, and the guy's name, like a JT Barrett, a Tim Tebow, I give you, those are the ones that you lean on in those type of situations for accountability, because you don't know. You think the situation that no one wants to be in, yet we always are, or we are a lot of times, is when things don't go well and you don't have that leadership, you don't have that maturity, and it's all on you. And those are again, you'll always be in that situation like that. And I just think knowing who that, there's certain ways in handling it. I don't think I've always handled it the best way, because I wanted everybody to have the same passion that I had. When you lost a game, I wanted people to be physically ill like I was. In reality, that's not the case. And sometimes I handled it incorrectly. When we lost a game, it took me months to get over it. Months. There's I'm almost 62 years old. There's still some I'm not over. I think about some of them every day. Every once in a while, I just say, damn it, where I almost admire, but not really. I mean, I have other people I've been around that they could care less. They lose, they're bouncing on the next one immediately. And I was like, how do you do that? I mean, so accountability is very personal, is very individually related. It's something that you have to be very careful. I've crossed the line at times because I personally was so distraught after a loss that I expected everyone to be like that. Or when someone's not doing well, but then there's other times I think I handled it really good. And that's where I would always not blame people, but say, okay, why? Keep asking the why. Why did that happen? Why did this player? And then I go back to the 3 reasons why. Number 1 is that there's a trust issue. Number 2, there's a skill set issue. And number 3, there's a conflict issue. That's what we talked about earlier.
When you think back on some of your favorite coaching experiences, what comes to, I know you've had many. When you think back on some of your favorite coaching experiences, what comes to mind?
So this is also interesting way of looking at things is that there's a couple different work environments you can find yourself in. And I'm going to give you the 2 extremes. Usually it's not that extreme. But the best work environment you can possibly be in is minimal expectations and great work ethic and character and teamwork. I walked into the University of Utah and we had incredible guys. I didn't recruit them, I inherited them. And we had minimal expectations. We were finished last in the Mountain West Conference. And after a couple of weeks of grinding on that team and working them hard, I thought, oh my God, I mean, this group is really good. I'm not just talking about talent, but just they work. Whatever I threw at them, they responded. And that's the ultimate work environment. Low expectations and high work ethic. And then the most difficult or awful work environment is high expectations and bad work ethic. It's called entitlement. So I just gave you the 2 extremes. Like most of life, it's usually in the middle. I just gave you an extreme. At University of Utah, there's nothing better. There's nothing better. I'm not going to use the teams, but there's also teams that I've had that it was miserable to go to work because it was entitlement. It was, we want this. I want to be an NFL player and I want to win a national championship, but I'm a pain in the ass. I'm not living my life the right way. I'm not working hard. I'm soft. Yet people tell me I'm the greatest. That's terrible. Like most of life, it's somewhere in between there, but I just gave you the 2 examples.
Yeah. What's interesting is with the Utah experience, minimal expectations. So our company teaches this concept called detachment, which is just let go of the outcome. Stop focusing on the result, focus on the process, focus on what you're executing. And my gut is that has a lot to do with probably why some of your teams did so well. They focused on process and execution.
Yeah, Coach Saban talks about that, and I've always I've never spoke like that. We did focus on the result. I think he calls it transformation of transactional or something like that, where I think it's really the same. When we were focused, like I heard him say it, I've listened to him a little bit. He's a friend of mine. Don't focus on the result, focus on the process. I can't say we always did. I mean, one leads to the other. We're focused on beating the Wolverines. Now, how do you beat the Wolverines? Well, there's a process. It's a 365, 24/7 process that we're going to do, and it's my job as leader to make sure we do it. So I think you're saying the same thing, that to focus on the process. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm not sure what that means. I believe that every human being, God created us to have a target. If you don't have a rival, if you don't have a target, if you don't have, the competitive spirit in you to beat that person or to beat that company or to win that day, I don't, that doesn't compute with me. Even in television, we want to beat ESPN. They're hard there because they're great at what they do, but every day, that's our target. When I was the head coach at Utah, our target was BYU every day. And that kind of put air in your lungs, that made you not want to use an alarm clock, get up in the morning. So we did focus on the final. We did focus on the result. I'm not saying I disagree, but I've never really used that word, that don't focus on the result, because I'm like, wait a minute, my entire career we focused on the result. If that makes sense.
It sounds like what you did was you trusted your process, you trusted the hard work, you trusted that entire 365 days a year with the target of knowing if you committed in that process, you would attain the result.
I agree.
Yeah, where there was like so that would make a lot of sense. So going, Coach, just as we kind of wrap up here a little bit, is there some sideline memories that you have where you just remember on the sideline looking around you going, wow, that was amazing, or whoa, what a ride?
Bob Davie was the head coach at Notre Dame and a dear friend, great coach. He followed Lou Holtz, and he wrote me a letter, handwritten note when I went to Ohio State. And he said, do me a favor, something that I didn't do. He was the head coach at Notre Dame. And, regardless what fans think or whatever, he did a hell of a job. It was to follow Lou Holtz. He's a hell of a football coach. And it was just insurmountable. Notre Dame's a hard place to work. Follow Lou Holtz is a hard thing to do. And he said, take your headset off and during a game and just take a deep breath and be grateful. Thank God that you have this opportunity. And I did that every game I coached at Ohio State because of that letter. I never did it before. And so my moment was at the end of the third quarter in the horseshoe. I would just take, and a manager, the guy was with me, what I was doing, I would take my headset off, shut the world out for a minute, actually step onto the field and stare at the band playing Hang On Sloopy. And that was my moment. Because as a kid, I remember watching I wish I did that my entire career. And I give that advice to people a lot, that just take a deep breath, man. What do you do? I know it's stressful. I know this can impact the rest of your life, the freaking game that's going on. But at some point, you're here. Be grateful. And so I did that every game I could. And then one other moment, there were two of them that I just remember that, and we can kind of wrap up with this, but when I went to Bowling Green, they were 1-10, 2-9, just a dismal place. And a lot of kids got kicked out. Didn't get kicked out, but they just quit. And they should have quit. It was a team that was, full of drugs and full of crap, and it was kind of a joke, to be honest with you. But the ones who stayed were the most resilient, greatest kids I've ever been around. And we had, I told them don't miss class. And it's a long story. And it was, the team went from 100 players down to, 60, 65 guys. And our first game was at Missouri. And, we have no business playing with Missouri. We were awful. We were the Bad News Bears. But we trained their ass so hard. And the mindset was, don't go beat Missouri, but get 4 yards on offense. We can train you for the next 7 months to get 4 yards. It's from here. Just look right. And the brain says, you know what? I can do that on offense. On defense, our whole message is tackle the ball carrier. We're not going to play much man coverage because we're not good enough. Just keep tackling. And here's the technique in tackling. We can teach you to be great tacklers. And everybody's like, of course we can. So we became great tacklers. And offense, we learned how to get 4 yards. And then it was, I don't want to brag or anything, but it was like it worked perfectly. And I said, and then you're going to wake up, we're going to be playing, and you're going to look up in the fourth quarter, we're going to be, all we need is someone to make a play. We win the damn game. So we go play Missouri in front of 70,000 or whatever it is. The team won one game the year before, and that's all we did is get first downs. And we got first down. On defense, we kept tackling. And sure enough, we're there, 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. We need to score a touchdown. We'll win the game. And we do. And my first game as a head coach, we took the Bad News Bears that were actually had some very good players, and we got 4 yards on first down, and we tackled on defense, and we won a game. Because if I would have said, let's go beat Missouri, everybody looked at me like I had 6 heads. Like, what are you talking? We can't beat Missouri. So that was a great moment.
Right. You broke it down to what needed to be focused on, and you got your team.
The brain can't handle, you say, let's go beat Missouri. They're going to be like, this guy's, what's he smoking?
Now, let me ask you, when you were on the sideline, did you have any moment on the sideline at the end of the game where you were like, okay, this is cool? Or was it too much in the yeah?
It was too much to handle. It was like, I didn't know what to do. This was my first game. I forget, I go shake the other guy's hand, what do I do? I've never been there. So.
And then, I think lastly, wrapping up, your last game at Ohio State, right? Did you know it was your last game?
I did. I announced my retirement after the Big Ten championship game. And it was ironic. I believe it was God's plan. I mean, he let me coach in the Rose Bowl. I've coached in so many different bowl games. Yet I grew up watching the Rose Bowl. To coach Ohio State in the Rose Bowl as a Big Ten champion was a dream come true. And I guess then the other part of me comes out and say, what a joke that would be. You finally get to the Rose Bowl and lose. So we played a very good Washington team, and we worked, but I already announced Ryan Day as the next head coach. We worked really hard. We went up 28-7. Dwayne Haskins was our quarterback and playing really great football. And sure enough, we started screwing around the second half, and they came back on us. And it came down to the end. So I did know that was my last game.
It's great having you on. So I know you do speaking engagements, correct?
I do.
And the topics are leadership, some of the topics that we even talked about today.
Yeah, team building. It's, what I've found out over the years, the correlation between great businesses and great teams, it's the same. It's all the same.
What Coach Meyer described today isn't just a football philosophy. It's a standard for how you perform and train others to do the same. He led his teams to success by preparing them rigorously, putting them in the hard situation before they were asked to handle it in the real world. Think about the level of preparation that Coach put his players through. He never wanted to put them in a position where they couldn't succeed. He had a process for implementing and adding new plays into the game plan. That process was built to drive the highest level of execution. So the question I want to leave you with today is, are you doing the same? As a leader, are you asking your team to prepare? Are you hiring someone with a hope they succeed mentality, or are you ready to actually invest in them? And as a sales professional, what expectations and standards do you have for yourself? Are you waiting for others to show you the way, or are you taking ownership of where you want to go and how you want to get there? That's it for our 200th episode. I want to thank Coach for investing in our journey, and I want to thank you and each and every one of you for being a part of it. If you found this series valuable, we'd love for you to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify, and or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time.